Hi everyone! We're going to kick off today's tutorial with the absolute basics, preparing the background that will set the tone for our entire composition. To start, I'm creating a new solid layer. The keyboard shortcut, of course, is Ctrl+Y. The color of the solid doesn't really matter at this stage. I usually go with black, since we'll be using it as a base for our effects. Next, let's apply the 4-color gradient effect. Why this one instead of a standard gradient ramp? Because it gives us 4 different control points. Now, let's set up our colors. I've already prepared a color palette, which I'm keeping to the side as a separate graphic file. Here's a pro technical tip. Set your palette layer as a guide layer, right-click the layer, guide layer. This way, you can see it in your preview for reference, but After Effects will ignore it during the final render, so you don't have to worry about turning it off later. In the Effect Controls panel, I'll now tweak our colors. For the main background, I'm using 2 dominant shades. At the top, a deep dark navy, almost hitting black, to simulate a cosmic abyss. At the bottom, I'll set a lighter, muted gray with a touch of blue. We can position each color point exactly where we want it to get the perfect look. A background with just a gradient feels a bit too flat. To give it that cinematic depth, I'm going to use some external particle footage. These are just tiny floating dust motes. I'll drop them onto the timeline right above our solid. To get rid of the black background from the particle video, we need to change the blending mode to either Add or Screen. I'm going with Add because it makes the bright spots pop a bit more. I'll reduce the opacity to about 20%. Next, I'm adding a layer to simulate light hitting from above, which helps establish the lighting direction for the entire project. I'll set the blending mode to multiply and drop the opacity to 50%. Notice how our scene instantly gains a sense of three-dimensionality. Let's take it a step further and create our own custom light source. I'll grab the pen tool, G, and draw an irregular, white shape at the top of the screen. I'm changing the color to a very pale light blue. Now for the most important step, the fast box blur effect. I'll crank the blur radius up to 150. This turns the sharp edges of the mask into a soft, glowing haze. If the effect feels too intense, you can always tweak the opacity. For me, 50% works perfectly. In modern tech animations, you often see a grid motif. So I'll create another solid and apply the grid effect to it. I'm changing the line color to light blue and setting the border to 2 to keep the lines thin and elegant. You can experiment with the cell size here, using size from corner point. To make sure the grid doesn't distract from the interface, I lower its transparency to 25%. Finally, let's take all the layers that make up our background and turn them into a pre-composition. I'm also moving the grid layer down so it sits right underneath the background layer. Now it's time for our main element. Using the rectangle tool, I draw a narrow horizontal rectangle. This will serve as our loading panel. In the shape options, you'll find the roundness parameter. Crank that up high to get those perfectly rounded edges. Now a very important step, the anchor point. So I use the shortcut Ctrl+Alt+Home to center it perfectly. Then, using the Align panel, I'll center the entire object relative to the composition. Instead of a solid color, I'm choosing a linear gradient. I'll dive into the layer parameters, contents greater than gradient fill, and match the colors to our palette. To get full control over how the colors are distributed, grab the selection tool V. You'll see 2 points connected by a line on the screen. These are your gradient controllers. Move them around until the transition looks smooth and professional. I'll name this layer Button. Now, let's create the element that will move inside the bar. I'll draw a small circle using the Ellipse tool. It needs to be slightly smaller than the height of our rectangle, so it fits inside with a bit of a margin. I'll center the anchor point and position the circle at the left start of the bar. Let's name this layer Circle. For this one, we're switching the fill type to a radial gradient. I set the colors from a bright white in the center to a soft gray on the edges. To give it a more premium look, I'm using a border trick. Duplicate the circle layer, Ctrl+D, increase its size by a few pixels to about 135 pixels, and change its gradient type back to linear. This technique creates a subtle shadow or glow beneath the circle, separating it from the bar. It's a tiny detail, but it makes a huge difference in the visual quality. Now we're entering the animation phase. I'll take both circle layers and pre-compose them. Here's a pro tip. If your composition is huge but your object is small, go into Composition Settings and shrink the dimensions to the size of the circle. For example, 135 by 135 pixels. Back in the main comp, I set the circle to its starting position and toggle the stopwatch for the position parameter. I'll move to the 20th frame and drag the circle to the right end of the bar. Now for the most crucial part of motion design, easing. I select the keyframes and hit F9, Easy Ease, then jump into the graph editor. I don't want the movement to be linear and boring. I'll pull the handles so the curve is steep at the end. This makes the circle start slow and then rocket forward at the very end. At the exact moment the circle hits the edge of the bar, the website needs to appear. I'll drop my pre-prepared screenshot or web design onto the timeline. To make the transition smooth, we're going to create an animated mask using a shape layer the same size as the website. I'll name it Mask. In the website layer settings, go to Track Matte and point it to the mask layer. Now, the website is only visible where the mask shape is. We need to fit the mask to the website panel as perfectly as possible by adjusting its position and size. Finally, tweak the roundness of the corners. This will give you a smooth, polished look for the entire animation. I'm going to animate the size and roundness of the mask. I'll start with a size identical to our loading bar button, and about 10 to 15 frames later, I'll change it to the full size of the website. Now we can adjust the size. Scale the mask down until both bars overlap perfectly. Just one last tweak to the corner roundness and our motion animation is all set. In the graph editor, I set a very fast start for that pop-out effect. To keep everything in sync, I'll animate the scale of the background at the same time, increasing it from 100% to 125%. This subtle zoom in makes it feel like the camera is moving closer as the website window opens. Of course, in this case, we also add easy ease to the animation and adjust it in the graph editor so that the movement starts off very fast. Now, let's jump into the website composition to add some micro animations. Top bar. I'll animate the scale. We don't need to start from zero. Since the anchor point is in the center of the comp, the bar will grow beautifully from that point. Of course, in this case, we also add easy ease to the animation and adjust it in the graph editor so that the movement starts off very fast. Text. No need to overcomplicate things here. A simple opacity animation from 0% to 100% is perfect. The button. If your button is a vector layer, use the create shapes from vector function. I'm going to animate the path. On the first keyframe, I'll pull the points in to form a circle, and on the second, I'll bring them back to a rectangle. This creates a cool morphing effect. Of course, in this case, we also add easy ease to the animation and adjust it in the graph editor so that the movement starts off very fast. Let's bring back the text. Let's create a mask so that the text is visible only when the entire button is on screen. I'll use a text animator, add the scale property, and set it to 0%. Then, I'll animate the range selector, start, from 0% to 100%. This makes the letters pop out one by one, which looks much more professional than just fading in the whole word. The animation of the website elements is coming in too early and is hard to see. Let's move all the layers forward by 4 to 6 frames so the animation starts a bit later. This will make it much more visible. Once the website is fully visible, we want to introduce an epic planet or moon element that the page will eventually tag behind. Grab the ellipse tool and draw a massive circle. Let's make it even 2000 pixels. This will be our moon or planet. Position it so it covers most of the screen. It still feels like the planet is way too small. Let's blast its size into outer space. Set it to over 3000 pixels so it fits our screen perfectly and fills the frame just right. Now, just position it correctly at the starting point and we can move on to the animation. At the 2-second mark, we'll animate the position of this circle moving upwards. In the first keyframe, place the circle completely off screen, below the view, and a few frames later, let it rise back into its place. Now, let's change the color to a deep navy blue. Don't forget to add easy ease, F9, and jump into the graph editor to adjust the speed. Make it start very fast and then smooth out. To make the website move in sync with the planet, we'll use parenting, the pick whip icon, to link the website layer to its mask. Then, we'll animate their scale and position so the site subtly slides down as the planet rises. Again, apply easy ease and refine the movement in the graph editor. Now is a good time to clean up the project and rename this layer to Moon. Let's change its color to a radial gradient. Dark on the edges and bright in the center. If the colors don't look right, use the on-screen controllers to stretch that light blue area out. This looks much better already. Next, duplicate the planet layer. We won't need the keyframes on this layer. Press U to show them, and then delete them all. Now, simply link this layer to the first moon layer using the parenting pick whip. On this top copy, remove the fill and leave only a light blue stroke outline. Apply a fast box blur with a value of about 40. This creates a beautiful atmospheric glow around the globe. Let's add one more light source using the pen tool. This time, I'm drawing a cone-like shape coming out from behind the planet. Add a heavy fastbox blur around 160. Finally, I want the light's movement to be identical to the moon's. To do this, I'll use the parenting tool again. Simply link the light underscore behind layer to the moon layer so they move together as one. I'll name this layer light underscore behind and animate the opacity from 0% to 100%. This makes the planet look like it's being backlit by a sun located somewhere far in the distance. Remember how we animated the background earlier? We're going to do the same thing here. At the exact moment the moon animation starts, create a keyframe for scale. A few frames later, set the background scale back to 100%. This subtle shrink will sync perfectly with the movement of the moon and the website. At this stage, the animation already looks fantastic. Finally, once everything is set, it's time to add the logo. It should only appear on screen once the moon is visible. Let's create an animation for it. I have my logo file here with separate layers for the icon and the text. First, we'll create a simple position animation for the icon. Over about 20 frames, have it slide into the center. We'll also add an opacity animation, so it fades in from 0%. Don't forget to apply Easy Ease to smooth it out. Now, let's animate the logo text. Once the icon is visible, I'll create a mask to reveal the text. I'll use a simple solid for this, placing it right where the text should appear. I'll set a position keyframe here, and at the start of the animation, I'll move it so the text is hidden. Then, using TrackMatte, I'll link the text to the mask and click the icon to invert it. Of course, we want the text itself to move too. We'll animate its position using the same timing as before, starting from a position where the text is completely hidden behind the mask. And just like that, in only a few minutes, we've created this incredible animation. If you want to see more tutorials like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. I also encourage you to check out my Patronite page, where you'll find plenty of extra materials and project files that aren't available anywhere else. Thanks for watching.